Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. It is the 50th anniversary of the fiat dollar, meaning that the United States abandoned the gold standard 50 years ago in August of 1971. Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki joins me on this special show. Learn about how this changed the United States and the world, what this means to your financial future, how you can act, and what is money anyway, today on Get Rich Education. You know, a lot of investors choose either cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market could provide both: Jacksonville, Florida. They've got 27% lower home prices and higher rents than the national median. Their market has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets over the last 30 years. Get positive cash flow today and above average appreciation for tomorrow. They often have available inventory in Jacksonville, if you can believe that. Start at cashflowandgrowth.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Santa Cruz, California, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. The venerable Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki will be with us here shortly. The time was right to invite him back because this is the 50th anniversary of a significant monetary event. So expect today's show to have a little something to do with real estate investing, but it's really an episode that's more about money. Now, this topic could lend itself to some touchy political opinion from Robert Kiyosaki today, and whether you agree with it or not, hopefully you can at least listen to his point of view. Most people don't consciously consider what money even is. To a lot of people, they probably see money as something that works well or seemingly works well. Why do 330 million Americans accept dollars as money anyway? If you ask most people that question, they would probably say that it's a belief system or that it has value because the government says so. You also have to pay your taxes in dollars. What money does, though, is that it solves a problem that every human on Earth has. It solves the problem of trade or exchange. If every person in this world had to go out and hunt their own food or grow their own food, then they wouldn't have time to do other things. Well, some people are going to be better at hunting and growing food than others. So if we all don't have to fulfill each individual thing that we need in life in order to survive, well, then we're all going to be better off. Facilitating trade or exchange means that we need some sort of intermediary good to trade, a currency. As economies become larger, this helps solve what we call our coincidence of wants. This way, people can specialize. You can be a specialist and create that one thing that you're really good at. Now, with money, I don't have to trade you a chicken for an apple. Now with this currency, we can balance out what would be an unequal trade between a house and a car. Somebody that creates one thing might not want what the other person wants or has, and vice versa. We can also store this value that we created by getting money and store it for later. A farmer can't save fresh fruit from year to year, nor can a baker save bread. So sound money is critical for lasting gains in wealth and economic progress. Sound money, that's why wealthy societies become dominant and a reason other societies are poor and are even ripe for conquest. So money then, it orders economic coordination in the world. But if you and I are going to trade, we have to both agree on what that intermediary good is, and we must both have faith that we can store our value there then. If I sell you a bushel of apples for $20 in order to fulfill your wants, well, then I need to believe that that $20 that you're giving me is going to somewhat hold its value over time so that I can later use it to, in turn, fulfill my own wants down the road. So money needs to have faith among those using it, faith that is going to hold its value. Money also must be fungible. Fungible means that items are interchangeable because they're identical to each other for practical purposes. Dollar bills are fungible, and the different serial numbers on them don't really matter. Money should be portable and divisible. That's a place where gold fails. Dollars and Bitcoin do well with portability and divisibility. Scarcity is one of the things that gives money value. Bitcoin does well here because it has that fixed and known supply of 21 million. Gold does just okay with scarcity because its supply increases 1 to 2% per year. Dollars fail with scarcity. They definitely do not have any sort of fixed supply, and therein lies our problem. With more and more dollars being printed in these last 50 years, they don't need to be tied to the supply of gold in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, today there are no world currencies tied to gold at all. Zero. Well, in this system, then doesn't every nation just have an incentive to import goods that another nation can make for them, like what the United States does to China? And then the United States can just print a whole bunch of dollars endlessly to easily pay back China for the goods that it's imported? There are some nuances there, but more or less, yes, that's how it works, and that's inflationary. Inflation means an expansion of the money supply, but today it's more commonly thought of as the diminished purchasing power of your dollar. That's what it really means when people talk about inflation for all intents and purposes today. Your Subway sandwich that cost $8 last year is $9 this year for that exact same sandwich. That's what we're talking about here. Now, here's the real problem. A producer doesn't just accept dollars for their apple. It's more than those types of transactions. You accept dollars from your employer in exchange for the labor that you have provided to that employer, or at least you've done that at some time in your life. Well, your very life is made up of your time and your labor. When you've worked in order to create value for another human being, and then that work is taken away from you, or the token of that work is taken away from you, is that theft? Well, that's your government stealing your wealth. That is monetary inflation. That is the big, big problem. And even aside from taxes, that's government intervention in the free market right there. Now, let's go back to around the time of the creation of the Federal Reserve System, which was in 1913. In the United States, we did not have a picture of a president on a coin until 1909. That's when Lincoln was put on the penny. Before that, pennies featured either a Native American or an allegorical image. That's more government creeping into your life. After Roosevelt was elected in 1932, things changed. Then the coins all featured past presidents suddenly. Of course, Roosevelt is the president that outlawed gold ownership in 1933, and that condition lasted for decades. In 1944, at what was basically a post-World War II international agreement that reordered the world economy called Bretton Woods, which was a meeting in New Hampshire, two big things were agreed upon there. The United States dollar would be the reserve currency of the world, and nations could always redeem their dollars for gold. Those two conditions, well, that only lasted 27 short years because tired of creditor nations asking the debtor U.S. to repay them in gold, President Richard Nixon screwed everyone over. He came on television on a Sunday night, August 15th, 1971, and said this.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Nixon blamed speculators. Yeah, he said that he was temporarily suspending the dollar's convertibility to gold. I don't know how temporary that was. We've been here in this condition for 50 years now. So he screwed all those nations over. Well, after dollars no longer had to be tied to gold, and we could just print dollars to repay debt to foreign nations, which technically is creating currency, what that did is that made each dollar, again, it is that dollar that you traded your time for, it made that dollar worth less. In the 1970s and 1980s, inflation was often higher than 10% per year after we were depegged from gold here. Gold itself shot up in value 385% from 1974 to 1980, partly because it takes more of these weakened dollars to buy 1 ounce of gold. And that's a problem that we really didn't get on top of. This higher inflation, we didn't get on top of it until we raised all kinds of interest rates so high that the 30-year fixed rate mortgage topped out at an interest rate of over 18% by October of 1981. And, reading the work of Dr. Saifuddin Ammous recently, he'll tell you that the cheap, mass-produced, processed food that started to become commonplace on grocery store shelves in the 1970s, that was motivated in order to keep consumer prices down, because Americans would lose all faith in the dollar if inflation ever appeared too high. So now we're talking about runaway inflation actually affecting the quality of the food that you put inside of your own body. So you've got to understand that this stuff matters. Manipulating the currency bastardizes the economy, and it trickles into areas of your life that you never even imagined that it could. More recently, to help stave off the Great Recession of 2009, the Federal Reserve had hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars printed during what they called QE, quantitative easing, to help pave over the problems. Yes, quantitative easing, the genteel term to make you think that everything is okay and easy. We're just easing. Then, during the crisis that began last year, trillions of dollars were printed, partly to pay people that were laid off in a government-created shutdown, ostensibly lowering the value of every existing dollar in circulation, including the ones that you own. And recently, inflation readings have exceeded 5% per year. They've stepped up. In fact, where have we gone in the 50 years from when Nixon said that nations can temporarily no longer redeem their debt with the U.S. for gold? Well, this is actually just 49 years, because listen to this. Last year, just listen to this stark honesty from Fed Chair Jerome Powell on the program 60 Minutes.
Simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities, and that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve banks.
And you're like, did he really just say that? Did that really happen? Yes, it did. He basically said, yeah, we print money. We create currency digitally out of thin air. Yeah, just kind of whenever we feel like it. And yeah, however much we want. If your dollar is a token of the value that you've created through your work, through your risk-taking, through your ingenuity, and through you taking time away from your family, well, then he's debasing what you've worked for. So then what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about all this? There are solutions. As you know, over the last year, I've discussed a term that I coined called the inflation triple crown. When you've got a cash-flowing property with a loan, Inflation pumps up your asset value, and it increases your cash flow, and it debases your debt because you get to pay back the bank with cheaper dollars. So real estate, when you employ this strategy, is the best inflation hedge that I know about. It's actually an inflation profiting center. You can go to the same place that I go to buy my own real estate this way at greturnkey.com. What about Bitcoin? It is non-confiscatable wealth. One of the greatest misnomers that I still hear about Bitcoin from people is that they think that they can't afford any because they see that it costs tens of thousands of dollars for just one Bitcoin. Well, no, you're looking at it the wrong way. You don't have to buy one full Bitcoin. You can just buy a tiny fraction of one for as little as $100 or maybe even $20. Just Coinbase.com. There you go. Bitcoin has a lot of other pros and cons. One downside is that the price is volatile. You also likely aren't going to get the cash flow that you get with real estate. And before you buy Bitcoin, understand that when you sell it, you are subject to capital gains tax. So yeah, the tax treatment is not as favorable as real estate either, but I like Bitcoin. I dabble in it. Robert Kiyosaki and I on the 50th anniversary of the fiat dollar, the removal from the gold standard, the inflation problem, the inflation solution, and more straight ahead. As the top-selling financial author of all time and really a mega influencer, a lot of people revere Kiyosaki as somewhat legendary. So if you would like to watch the video of he and I's interview today, you sure can do that at our Get Rich Education YouTube channel with his fourth appearance here on GRE, Robert Kiyosaki and I, straight ahead. Hey, is your IRA in a real estate syndication? Yikes, a 37% UBIT tax could hit you, but you still have a chance to set up your eQRP and avoid this. Did you make too much money in 2020 and need more deductions? Now federal law lets you set up an eQRP in 2021 and get deductions for last year, retroactively. Even put old IRA and 401k money in Bitcoin, gold, or your own business. Get control of all of your retirement money, tax and penalty free. Text eQRP in all capital letters to 72,000. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They've provided GRE listeners with more loans than anyone, and it's where I got my last few loans. They finance single-family income property up to 4plexes. They're the number one lender for beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and get your custom plan for expanding your cash-flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Hal Elrod, author of The Miracle Morning, and listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
I'd like to welcome this week's guest onto the show. He needs little introduction because he is the greatest selling financial author of all time. He wrote the landmark book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Robert Kiyosaki.
How are you doing, Keith? How are things in beautiful Alaska?
Excellent. It is prime time in Anchorage, I'll tell you that, which is a bit the opposite of Arizona this time of year. We're here at an interesting time because we are really up on the 50th anniversary of August 15th, 1971, a date that probably doesn't mean much to a lot of Americans because they don't know their monetary history so much. That's when President Richard Nixon basically said, if America owes debt to a foreign nation, that nation can no longer be repaid in gold, only dollars. And this really made it easier for America to crank up the printing press for more currency creation, what have you. So, Robert, take us back to the 1970s as far as from a monetary perspective and what was going on at this time and how that ushered in a new era of inflation.
What happened was on August 15th, 1971, Tricky Dick Nixon announced on the program Bonanza that he was taking the dollar off the gold standard. So many things happened on that date. Most Americans had no idea what he was talking about.
Right.
He was basically breaking the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. And the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement is America. This is as World War II was ending. It was, I forgot who the guy was, but they promised the world that the dollar would be the reserve currency of the world. and it would always be backed by gold. In other words, the dollar, US dollar, was as good as gold. So that was 1944. And then what happened is, as you know, the world changed and Germany and Japan started shipping us all these products. Our enemies were shipping us all these products, and France and Europe and all this. And pretty soon we couldn't pay the bills. And so that's on August 15th, during the program of Bonanza.
Yeah.
Tricky Dick comes on and says, hey, adios, our promise. So they broke the contract with the world. And the dollar became what's called fiat currency, or what I call fake money. More specifically, it became debt and taxes. And what that meant is the U.S. government could print money and the taxpayer paid for it. That's fiat currency. That's why it was such an important date. August 15, 1971 is 50 years. The Rich Dad Company did our own program on it with our specialists on debt and taxes. I'm $1 billion in debt and I pay no taxes. And the reason for that is that once they changed the rules of money back in 1971, savers became losers, and debtors who understood debt was money made more money, and we pay no taxes. Average person, because our academic system is basically Marxist, has no idea what I'm talking about. So most of you, I would say 99% of the people who's listening to this thing have no idea what I'm talking about. All they know is work hard, save money, and pay taxes.
That's right. You bring up the television show Bonanza. It was this Western show that was preempted because President Richard Nixon on a Sunday night came on television to make this announcement, ushering in that era of fiat currency, F-I-A-T, meaning money is really just backed by decree or by authority of the government. Robert, I really think that one thing that was happening during this time was it sort of reinforced this notion of Gresham's law. Now, a lot of people think that Gresham's law means that good money drives out bad, but actually it's just the opposite. Bad money drives out good. So can you tell us more about Gresham's law and give us an example of kind of what was going on around this time with this bad money driving out good?
This has been going on throughout history, is that governments, because they can't pay their bills, because they're functionally incompetent nincompoops, I don't trust anybody working for the government. My poor dad was a government bureaucrat, right. Academic school teacher. But anyway, what Gresham's law says is that bad money drives out good money. So back in 1964, when I was a little kid, about 16 years old, I started noticing the dimes and quarters and half dollars had a little copper tinge around it. So the copper tinge was silver being debased. What it means by debased, they were adding copper to silver. So the value of our dimes and quarters and half dollars was going down. The Romans did it also back in Roman times to pay for their wars. And what they did, they started shaving or filing off the silver. And that's why if you see Roman coins today, they're all disfigured. So that's why, to prevent the filing of the coins, back in Roman times, they added the serrations at the edge of a coin. So you could see that they were not being filed away. The trouble is the price of silver, a dime was worth more than a dime. What the U.S. government did in 1964 was added copper to it. So as a young boy, I would go to the bank. I'd caddy to make money because my parents gave me no money. And I'd take my dollars, I'd go to the bank, and I would trade the dollar in for rolls of dimes and quarters and half dollars. And I would go through all the coins, and I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't trust my government. I would go through things. I'd find all the coins with copper in them. I'd rewrap them and turn it back into the bank, and I kept all the real silver coins. And then what happens is 1965, I leave little sleepy Hilo, Hawaii, and I go to school in New York, and I had a bag full, I don't know what they call it, but it's basically junk silver.
Yeah.
I came home one year and I said, hey, Mom, where is, I go from New York to Hilo, Hawaii. And I asked my mom, I said, what happened to my bag of silver? And she said, I spent it. I was already kind of indoctrinated by my rich dad by that point. He was my best friend's father. And I realized something really important. And the lesson is poor people have no idea what money is. And our academic system is the culprit of that because most academics are Marxists. Not that they're bad people, they're Marxists. And they don't understand money. See, Marx was a complete loser when it came to money. You look at his history, He fathered kids, but he never paid for them, never take care of them. And he borrowed money constantly. And that built up this hate inside of him of the rich. And that hate of the rich is transferred through academics today, school teachers. My poor dad.
Well, you give a great example of Gresham's law and how about 50 years ago, we're moving closer and closer to inflation. Bad money driving out good. You give the example of basically nickel or copper being put into coins, driving out the silver coins, and then people wanting to hoard the silver coins, since that's good money, being driven out of circulation by the bad money and all these replacements for things that have intrinsic value like silver. Gresham's law, bad money driving out good. The 1970s then did bring in this era of higher inflation, partly because the dollar was completely removed by the gold standard. Interestingly, Gerald Ford, the follow-up president after Richard Nixon, he tried to get on top of inflation with something called a WIN campaign, Whip Inflation Now, which was this terrible failure. Part of it is he wanted everyone to wear these big, dumb-looking buttons that said WIN on them. Ford was basically promoting austerity in the 1970s. He asked people to drive 5% fewer miles and waste less food and save energy and things like that. So we're really in this stagflationary era. So do you have any other thoughts or anecdotes on what the monetary environment was like in the 1970s high inflation era, Robert?
There were some very important things that happened in the 70s. 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. 1974, ERISA was passed. ERISA stands Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And anytime the government says we're responsible for your security, you're in trouble. Right. ERISA, that was 74. ERISA today is known as a 401k. And it's one of the biggest con jobs I've ever seen. The reason that's important is when I was a kid in the 50s, when the dollar was stable, it was stable. People did not play the stock market. My rich dad would say only gamblers play the stock market. And the reason I'm a kid, I don't understand what he's saying, but he had a couple of executives that worked for him that wanted to get rich. Because they weren't entrepreneurs, they were employees. Their way of thinking of getting rich, this is in the 50s, was to play the stock market. Back in the 50s, smart people saved money because they weren't printing it. It was the magic of compounding interest, and they invested in bonds. So when I was in school, I invested in bonds. I put $18.75 away, and 10 years later, I got $25. I didn't think it was that much, but we were trained to invest in bonds, where my rich dad said only gamblers play the stock market. The reason 74 is so important, many things happened on that date. 1974 was when the mass American public was shifted into the stock market. So today you have my generation, the boomers, and they're all hoping and praying their 401k is going to be there, and it won't be. We're heading for a massive stock market crash, as you know. And so their 401ks will be toasted. So that was 74 with ERISA. And 74, the one thing that Gerald Ford did do is he made it legal for Americans to own gold. And up until that time, it was illegal for Americans to own gold. So it was a very strange time. And then this whip inflation now, was some feeble attempt to stop. I don't know. I mean, as Hitler says, thank God people are so stupid, the government can control them. But most Americans have no idea what that meant. All I remember is back in the 70s, I was just getting out of the Marine Corps. I was a pilot in Vietnam. And I'd go to my favorite Chinese restaurant, and they had to have whiteout on all the menus because the prices were going up so fast. So I'd go in one day and a price of chow mein would be $1. Next day it'd be $2. And so that's where Gerald Ford came up with WIN. I don't know how these stupid bureaucrats in government think people are that stupid, but we are. We still don't know what happened with what caused inflation. We still don't. And the inflation then spread into the stock market and the real estate market. We're on the verge at the 50th anniversary of August 15th, 1971. I predict we're in a depression right now, and a biggest crash in financial history is coming. You just cannot keep printing money.
Yes, savers potentially were winners back in the day, but like you say today, savers are losers because the rate of inflation exceeds what one can get on a savings account. Some people have no concept that as late as 1980, interest rates on savings accounts were as high as 12%. But yeah, leading up to this point, that Whip Inflation Now campaign by Gerald Ford was such a failure. A lot of people made fun of it and they turned the buttons upside down. So it read NIM rather than WIN. And people said NIM stands for no immediate miracles and need immediate money and all these sorts of things because prices kept rising even as one's wages rose. It's sort of this vicious cycle that we were in. So as soon as people are aware that there is inflation like they were 40 or 50 years ago, that oftentimes makes a consumer want to spend a dollar quickly before it loses purchasing power, like you mentioned with what was going on there at the menu that they were looking at. And then that employee, they go ahead and they ask their boss for higher wages. They might get higher wages. Well, then the business thinks, well, to pay this employee higher wages, I'm going to have to raise my prices. So now it raises prices on consumers again. And it's kind of this vicious cycle, which can make inflation get out of control. That was a big part of the problem until Paul Volcker stepped in the late 70s. It was interesting because Volcker really wanted to limit dollar printing and hike up these interest rates. Like we got such high interest rates on mortgages and savings accounts. It's incomprehensible to people today because today we've had low inflation for a couple decades. And a lot of the young people today, I don't really think they have any concept of inflation, Robert.
Yeah, right. They're pretty stupid. Our whole academic system is based on ignorance, financial ignorance. And that's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad back in 1997, because I'm a Marine. And a lot of people ran from Cuba, right? Everybody's running from Cuba and Venezuela, hopefully from North Korea and China and coming to America. But I hate to say this, but while people were running from communism, my friends and I were killing communists in Vietnam. And so I was a Marine pilot out there, and everybody goes, oh, you weren't doing that. No, we were trying to shake hands with the frickin' communists who were killing us, but they invaded our school system. And that's what happened. So in 1973, I come back from Vietnam. I arrive at Norton Air Force Base with my men. I took 16 troops over there with me as a Marine lieutenant, and I brought 16 men back. That was my job. My job was to bring them home alive. I crashed 3 times in Vietnam. A lot of horrible things happened. And what happened? Those frickin' hippies, those Woodstock generation communists start spitting on us. That's when I knew America was dead. So a lot of things happened in the 70s that we're only paying for today. And that's why there's still no financial education in our schools. And I sit here going, well, talking about it's not going to do any good. So what are you going to do about it? So what I did was back in 1972, once I realized Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, I took my helicopter and I had to fly behind enemy lines to look for gold because, again, it was illegal since 1933 under FDR to own gold. Yeah. That guy, FDR, was one of the biggest communists we ever had. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Everybody loved the guy because he brought in Social Security. He raised taxes to 94%. People don't know that stuff about him. All of that stuff started, and that was a shift of America towards communism back then. And I know it's not popular for people to use the word communism, but what else would you call it? Communism was based on 3 things: abolition of private property, a graduated income tax, and the abolition of inheritance rights. In other words, everything we did, according to Marx and Engels, was to have people own nothing. And if you understand the psychology of this guy, Marx and Engels, they were followed by Lenin, Stalin, then Khrushchev, then Gorbachev. And what happened in 1989, communism fell all over the world. The Berlin Wall came down and all this. So here I'm a Marine going, thank God, capitalism has finally won, but it already infected our schools. And that's why academics are mostly progressive, liberal, Marxist. They don't know it, though. Problem is, they never studied Marx. They never studied Lenin. They never studied Hitler. They never studied Mao. So ignorance is bliss amongst our academics. That's why you don't find me hanging out in schools too often.
Yeah, and you talk about how important it is for someone to be action-oriented and not just talk about this stuff in case we are getting into a higher inflation era now. Now, about 4 decades ago, it took Paul Volcker to slow down the printing press and raise interest rates to get on top of inflation. We sure did, but we talk about being action-based, Robert. What's something that a person can do to protect themselves against the diminished purchasing power, against inflation today?
Well, just understand this is that Marxism is based upon taxes. And that's what happened in 1971 when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. That was communism coming into America, because it was Lenin who said, the way to kill capitalism is to debauch the currency. I'll say it again. The way to kill capitalism is debauch the currency.
Yeah.
So that's what happened in 1971 when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. The second thing that Marx and Lenin said is a way to kill capitalism is via taxes. That's history. I mean, just read the damn books, idiots. So right now, what are they going to do? This has been 2020 has been the biggest money printing in world history.
Right.
It used to be our national debt. Our debt is now going to push 30 trillion. And that means the taxpayers got to pay for it. I sit here watching our schools, and they have critical race theory and wokeness and Antifa and trigger events and talking about all this garbage in school, which is Marxist. I hate to say this, but Black Lives Matter, they openly admit they're Marxist. Critical race theory, openly admit they follow Marx. I mean, you can go onto the website. I'm not saying anything outside the parameters of logic. Just study that stuff. When you talk about Volcker trying to crush it, look at the stock market. This is an all-time high. And the reason 74 is so important, that was when Gerald Ford pushed Americans into that 401k plan. And so my generation, the old guys, we're about to take a hammering like we've never had before. You think homelessness is big now? It's only going to increase when old guys like me have no retirement. So what's Biden and President Kamala going to do? They're going to print more money. That's what happened in 781. But Volcker said, wake up. Look at what's happening today.
It's kind of like what Buckminster Fuller told us. Don't fight the forces, use them. You mentioned that the United States is nearing $30 trillion in debt. What's the easiest way for us to repay our debt? It's to print dollars. That makes it, of course, easier to pay back China or all the other countries that we have debt with. But when it comes to what to do, Robert, you actually say something that I absolutely love that has to do with comparing gold to the dollar to Bitcoin. Can you tell us about that?
I'll say it again. In 1972, I went over to Vietnam. It was 6 months. I was there on January 3rd, 1972. Every person knows the day they went over. They know that they're coming back. It's a one-year tour.
Yeah.
And then my rich dad wrote me a letter saying, hey, watch out. Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. But nobody saw it because it was on television. And nobody knew what it meant. With no financial education in our schools. Right. So I was looking for gold. So I bought my first gold. I fly behind enemy lines because the NBA was coming south, killing everybody. We were killing them back. And the atrocities were horrible. I go to this little gold mine in Vietnam to try and buy gold. And I realized I didn't know what gold was because FDR made it illegal for Americans to own gold in 1933. So that's how stupid we are. So that little Vietnamese woman, she taught me so much because I tried to negotiate on the price of gold. This is 1972. Gold was about $50 an ounce. Today's 1,800. And she wouldn't budge. She didn't speak English. I didn't speak Vietnamese, obviously. And I'm behind enemy lines. I know we'll get killed at any moment. And I'm trying to bargain. I'm trying to get her to give me a discount on gold. And she goes, spot, spot, spot. So what the hell is she saying? And she was giving me the best education of my life. The price of gold is in spot means this is the price of gold all over the world on this day. And so I went, holy moly. We all have these moments, unfortunately, because our academic system is Marxist. They lean hard left. AOC and Bernie and Biden and Kamala. It's not a good time. So that's why I write about capitalism. And the way to protect yourself is go back to God's money, which is gold, silver, and people's money is Bitcoin. Because you can't see Bitcoin is decentralized money. The dollar is centralized, central banking system. Anything centralized is communist. It's called command and control of the economy is communism. And people don't know that. So when they say central bank, that's communism. The Fed is run by, I think, 8,000 PhDs, like my poor dad. People have never had a job in their lives. Yeah. They've never run a business. They don't know what it's like to hire people, to fire people, to lose your job, to lose your business, to lose your life savings. These are academics from our best schools like Harvard, Wharton, Yale, and they run the Fed, a centralized bank, which is communism.
What's so interesting, some people wonder how long our currency can stay fiat and be off a gold standard. Well, it's lasted 50 years now, but interestingly, something has changed within, if you want to call it the latter portion of this last 50 years, and you bring it up, and that is Bitcoin, something decentralized. If gold is God's money and the dollar is the government's money, Bitcoin is the people's money. A lot of people, they want to convert their dollar into something like Bitcoin. That might be bad money driving out good because people don't want to put their Bitcoin in circulation. A lot of people hold on to it. Maybe it's back to Gresham's law where Bitcoin is good money and the dollar is not so good money.
It's really how smart you are. The biggest piece of real estate is your left ear between your right ear. That's 6 inches. And that's why I started the Rich Dad Company in 1996 with the cash flow forward game, is we have no financial education in our schools. If you're going to beat communism in our schools, you have to teach capitalism at home. And that's where I went. I am a Marine. I know what I'm saying upsets every liberal, progressive, communist pinko out there. But you guys spit on me when I came back from Vietnam, and I'm spitting back. I fight for our freedoms. Our freedom of speech is taken away. They're going after our guns. Why are they going to go take away our guns? Because for communism to work, you have to suppress the rioting that's about to start. It's history.
We convert our dollar into something like gold or Bitcoin or even real estate debt, we're starting to take some of that power away from dollar holders, that being what the government issues.
It's more than that. It's centralized versus decentralized.
Yeah.
You see, the reason I like Bitcoin, it took me a while to understand, and I'm not an expert at it, but I understood it was DeFi, decentralized finance. So I love Bitcoin. I love anything that goes against the communist system called the Federal Reserve Bank and the U.S. government and Wall Street. If you understand that, you'll understand me. I am a U.S. Marine. I went to the academy. I went to Vietnam twice. I'm still fighting for our freedoms, our freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, the freedom of religion. And all that's being taken away right now by communists. Everything Marx said is coming true today. I know it's unpopular, but I went to military school. And at military school, this is what we studied. So I'm studying Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. It's in 1965. In 72, I'm flying over the wreckage. I'm fighting in Vietnam now. I'm going, oh my God. I remember I flew off my carrier. I turned right with a flight of 2 transport helicopters. And I was a gunship coming in behind of them. And it was the first time I'd been to Vietnam in 66. Now in 72, I'm flying over what they call the French Indochina Riviera. And there were these beautiful chateaus, beautiful French chateaus. Man, those guys had the life, the French did. But they lost it, Bien Phu, if you know your history of military. And I saw these burned out chateaus along the beach as I'm flying to Hue, the old-time capital of Vietnam. And I'm looking at these burned out chateaus. I'm listening to my economics professor at the academy, and history became real in front of me. I said, am I looking at America today? These burned out chateaus. And then my office is in Scottsdale, Arizona. I drive past Neiman Marcus and it's all boarded up. There's rioting, there's paint all over. And I said, what I saw back in Vietnam in 1972, the bombed out buildings, is happening today in America. It happened in Scottsdale, Arizona. And that's why you see homelessness stacking up all over and all this. That's what Marx wanted. That's what our schools teach. Critical race theory, postmodernism, that stuff. It's horrible.
Yeah, and bringing it back full circle to inflation, if you want to call Bitcoin maybe the future of money, maybe new money, I think its most compelling value proposition is the fact that it really cannot be inflated beyond 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, unlike the dollar that one can just print endlessly.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not a Bitcoin expert. I just like the philosophy. It's decentralized.
Yeah.
Decentralized. The Fed, the Treasury, Wall Street, centralized. I fought communism. I fight it today.
That's right. The government is completely outside of Bitcoin. Robert, your wisdom has been helpful to a lot of people. It was great to go back to the 70s and just think about how that context shapes what we do, how we can act today. If someone wants to learn more about you and what you're doing today and how you're helping teach people things that they cannot get inside the school system, what's the best way for them to go about doing that, Robert?
Well, that's why I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. See, I'm coming out with a new book on November 10th, 2021. It's called The Capitalist Manifesto. I studied the Communist Manifesto. See, the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of all property, 2, graduated income tax, and no right of inheritance. It's to take everything you work for away. And that's what's happening today. I'm writing the Capitalist Manifesto because the position of Rich Dad has always been to fight communism taught in schools. We teach capitalism at home. See, the last bastion of freedom is our homes and our education and our minds. But if you go to school, you get postmodernist education, which is, as they'll admit, Marxist. Just go to their site. They say, we're Marxists. Black Lives Matter admit they're Marxists. And I don't know what else you guys want to look at. I'm not against Marxism. It's a free country. You can be a Marxist. You can be a Buddhist. You can be a Christian. You can be Jewish. I mean, I don't really care. Just leave my freedom alone. And that's what the U.S. Marines fought for. We fought for our freedom, the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the freedom to bear arms. That's all I fight for. So the best way to fight for it is in our heads and re-educating ourselves, because we've been indoctrinated into Marxism since the 30s.
Well, getting out of the dollar is a way to get away from inflation and to get toward freedom, which is what you were fighting for. So we truly thank you for your service there.
Yeah. Can I say something? The thing that's opposite is I'm not against the dollar. I just know the dollar is debt and taxes. So my 50th anniversary of Nixon's August 15, 71 thing is my expert, Ken McElroy, comes on. We're $1 billion in debt, and I pay no taxes. Trump pays no taxes either. So right now, if I can leave you guys with those thoughts there, how in the world did these guys get $1 billion in debt? But that's what happened in 71. And we pay no taxes, because that's what happened in 71 also. And if you can understand that, you'll understand that you've been brainwashed in our schools. And so that's why I write, that's why I speak. And it's not gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Is it what was put inside your head at school? Are your school teachers communist or are they capitalist? I think most school teachers are like Marx. They're angry people that can't understand why the rich are getting richer, because they're not capitalist. So if you understand that, and I'm not against any of that, this is a free country, make your choice. I just take huge risks saying these things because I've been shut down and censored so many times. I mean, you might get censored too for having me on your program, but I just want our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to pray, our freedom to do what we wish, the freedom for not wearing a mask, the freedom to not get vaccinated. That's all I fight for, my freedom. You want to get the vaccination, you want to wear a mask, you want to give all your money back to the government, you want to pay higher taxes and make less money, and it's a freedom of choice, okay?
You bring up debt. If savers are losers, then be a debtor. You want to be the opposite of a saver and be the opposite of a loser. Sure, you bring up the $1 billion of debt. We like to get into debt with real estate around here because we know at a 5% inflation rate, if we have $1 million in debt on real estate, the tenant services that for us. And then with 5% inflation, after 1 year, we only owe the bank back $950K in inflation adjusted dollars and only $900K in inflation adjusted dollars after year 2 and so on. So that's why we love real estate debt as a hedge against inflation, against the dollar.
Yes, but be very, very careful. I stopped buying real estate a while ago because I think the biggest problem is commercial real estate, as you know.
Yeah.
And that's where the biggest debt of all is. I'm driving around Arizona. We're a pretty affluent place, Scottsdale and all that. A lot of money moving into Scottsdale because people are migrating out of California, Oregon, Seattle. But it's the commercial real estate I look at. I go, the shopping center right next to my house is empty. And there's a lot of debt sitting underneath that shopping center.
Yeah.
So that's why I caution people, just be very, very careful today. Don't assume that what worked 5 years ago will work 5 years from now. And that's the biggest mistake they leave. I can leave you with one last thought, okay? I've been investing for most of my life. And there's a saying that investors have is the bull goes up the stairs, the bear goes out the window. But there's something else that happens spiritually inside investors. And the bull is going up, everybody's happy. They could be going broke, but they're still happy because the stock market is going up, real estate prices are going, and you get this false sense of euphoria. So in a bull market, everybody's happy. But when the bear goes out the window, they get depressed, and that's a depression. And so that's what my friend Jim Records and I are saying right now. We're already in a depression. I would be cautioned talking to everybody. Don't assume that what worked 5 years ago will work 5 years from now. I was driving around with my friend, who's another multi-million real estate guys. And we're entrepreneurs. We own a lot of property, a lot of businesses. And we're driving around, we're looking for a place to eat in Scottsdale. This was just 2 nights ago. And we go to this restaurant. We can't even get in. Every restaurant is packed. Everybody's happy. That's the bull going up the stairs. Real estate prices are up, stimulus checks are up, kids are making fortunes and Robinhood stock trading, whatever they're doing. That's the bull up the stairs. We went into like a third restaurant. We couldn't get in. So you have to come back at midnight for a reservation. That's Scottsdale, Arizona, pretty affluent place.
Yeah.
The last place, Keith, was all these women were dressed in evening gowns. And my friend Scott turned to me and said, it's time to sell. People were in such a euphoric high. And so somebody says, but was it a high school prom? I said, these women had been out of high school for about 3 decades. Everybody is celebrating when the bull going up the stairs is euphoria. But anybody who's lost their job, they're already heading into depression, if you know what I mean. If you're homeless right now, you're in depression, and it's growing. That's why suicides are up, wife beatings up, and all that crap is up. People losing their jobs or businesses. So depression has started. So that's why Jim Records, he wrote the book, The New Depression. We're already there. Depends on who you talk to. So the final word is this. There was a saying that goes, well, how did you go bankrupt? I think this was from Ernest Hemingway or something. He says, well, 2 ways. I went bankrupt first, slowly, then suddenly. I thank you, Keith, for doing what you do to educate, even though what I have to say is a Marine Corps point of view. It's not a Pinko point of view. I'm not going to receive postcards from Nancy Pelosi.
No Christmas card there. Well, we really thank you for sharing your time, sharing your wisdom. You can learn more about what Robert does at the Rich Dad Company at richdad.com, or look forward to the release of the Capitalist Manifesto this fall. Robert Kiyosaki, it's been valuable. As always, thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Thank you very much. Keep teaching, my friend. Keep teaching. Most important thing you can do today.
Big thanks to Robert Kiyosaki today. Yeah, more venerable wisdom from the sage there, and some other colorful commentary too. He doesn't hold back. So what about solutions to monetary inflation in a post-gold standard era? I don't even believe it's feasible that we return to the gold standard. I mean, if you just look at what the Treasury Department says, official gold reserves are currently somewhere around 250 million ounces. We're looking at a market value of close to $500 billion then, and that's just not enough metal to support an economy as large as America's, not unless the price of each existing ounce of gold was fixed at something pretty outrageous like $100,000. If you think that returning to the gold standard is important to you, you can support a political candidate that supports that stance. Ron Paul was a presidential candidate in the not too distant past that supports the dollar being tied to the gold standard again, and I know some other candidates have in the not too distant past. So what can you do to protect yourself and your family and the things that are close to you and important to you? Because I like to stay action-oriented here. I actually have 4 different answers to that question about how you can position yourself. Let me get really specific and even give you some websites here, some resources that can help you. The first is that, as you know, real estate is my favorite hedge because you do win that inflation triple crown. If we get high inflation such that, say, over a few years, a dollar is only worth half as much as it is now, well, your rental property then should be worth twice as much as denominated in dollars. So then you'd have twice the price, but the same value, unless you've got a loan on it. Then you've got a real home run because you might 5x your equity position. Your rents will shoot way up as long as the tenant wage increase is commensurate with higher inflation. And then your inflation-adjusted mortgage debt would be cut in half. That is a win-win-win with real estate. You can get started with income property from where I get my own property at greturnkey.com. And I've grown a little tired of seeing clickbait articles about how we're in an era of hyperinflation in America. No, we are not. Economists agree that hyperinflation starts at 50% to 100% per month. Yes, per month. We are certainly not there. High inflation and hyperinflation, then, are two different things. Kiyosaki warns against commercial real estate. Of course, I've talked about that on previous shows. We have been residential real estate investors here at GRE since day one. The second hedge against inflation is Bitcoin. I've discussed some of the pros and cons there already. Start at Coinbase.com or another reputable cryptocurrency exchange. And then gold itself is that classic inflation hedge. I've bought gold from both APMEX.com, which is spelled APMEX. It stands for American Precious Metals Exchange. Or the last time that I bought gold, I bought it from a friend and sponsor of Get Rich Education here, Damian Lupo. Yeah, the same person that helps you set up your eQRP retirement plan. So those are some gold resources for you. Gold is probably not going to make you wealthy, but it can prevent a financial wipeout better than nearly anything else. And the fourth way that you can hedge yourself against inflation in a post-gold standard world is something that might make you laugh. And actually, it helps you improve your quality of life more than those first three things, real estate, Bitcoin, or gold. And it also entails the least amount of learning among the four. Do you have any guess? Any guess at all as to what this inflation hedge is? Well, to keep your dollars from losing purchasing power, which is what happens if you save them, the opposite of saving is spending. Yeah, spend your dollar, then inflation can't get it. In high inflation, your $10,000 vacation to the Seychelles could cost $12,000 next year, so then do it this year. Again, if you want to see today's chat with Robert Kiyosaki and I, then go ahead and make it visual. Check it out on YouTube. The channel name is Get Rich Education, of course. Also, I'd love to have you subscribe to the GRE podcast here. That's how you'll get next week's episode delivered to you. And next week, there could be some content people will find offensive as we're killing some financial sacred cows from the guys from Wealth Without Wall Street. They're going to be here. That all goes down here next week on the GRE podcast. Until next week, like an ice cube melting in your hand, don't let your dollar get inflated away. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.